When delving into the vintage computing hobby, the first question that comes to mind upon acquiring a vintage computer of any kind is, how do I transfer files or install software on it? Back then, games and software were distributed through floppy disk, a physical medium dating as early as the late 60s, carrying a piece of software. However, they started to become obsolete as games began to be distributed on CD-ROMs. Compared to floppy disk, CD-ROMs have aged more gracefully because they are less fragile. With floppy disk, a single mistake can lead to data loss or corruption. I never seemed to have any luck with floppy disk, no matter how hard I tried. One solution I found for this issue was using a device known as the Gotek floppy emulator. Not the real deal, but it is more reliable with the use of USB flash drives. You can easily transfer small files or even use a boot disk with it. Given that your old computer can't boot to CD-ROMs, so you can install an operating system of your choice. Anyway, if you had the money to go searching for copies of your favorite games, what would be the best way to proceed? If you don't care about collecting or plan to use it most of the time, I recommend buying jewel cases. Finding a jewel case copy of a game or software is a more affordable option, depending on the piece of software and how commonly they appear on auction sites like eBay. One thing to keep in mind is the condition of the disc. Depending on how old the discs are, you could encounter potential disc reading problems. The best common practice, once you obtain a legit copy, is to create a backup image using software like IMGburn or ImageBurn or other suitable program. However, if you don't have a DVD drive, as more modern hardware is starting to ditch the disk drive and even the drive bays, I would suggest buying an external DVD writer to get around that issue. So in case your original copy stops working, or you want to preserve its condition, you can grab some CDRs and burn a copy to use. And that's the other thing, as the advent of CDRs back then allowed pirates to start burning packs of games and other software in the form of wearer CDs. You could even find a ripped copy of a game on the internet and burn that to a CDR. This caused publishers to start coming up with ideas to combat this issue, with DRM solutions like SafeDisk and the infamous Securom. Anyway, if you are a collector of such software, explore big boxes. Once an interesting collecting hobby, it has turned into a rather cutthroat market. If you are only interested in getting a legit copy of a game just to play it, then I don't recommend this method, as you will burn a hole in your wallet trying to buy your favorite games for hundreds of dollars that could have been better spent on something more worthwhile. However, if you are passionate about the hobby, to each their own. Big boxes were a common way of distributing software to store shelves back in the 80s and 90s, before fading away in favor of smaller boxes during the 2000s. However, it wouldn't be long before digital services like Steam and later Good Old Games started to take off, and obtaining physical copies of games began to fade away, reducing games to just DVD cases with a disc, or depending on the game's release, including a Steam key for activation. Speaking of DVDs, some games back in the 2000s would ship with DVDs instead of CD-ROMs, so be sure to have a DVD drive on hand for those. As for the big boxes, it is interesting to note that back then, people didn't really care about them, as they took off more shelf space. Thus, they would often get rid of the box and only keep the jewel case. It was only when the retro gaming hobby emerged that people started to care about these boxes. As for other methods of file transfer, there is network file sharing, and this method can be done in a number of ways. It is about as simple as running an FTP server and logging in, but I do tend to prefer Samba over FTP. Most older Windows versions come with file sharing support through Samba version 1, allowing users to even mount the network share as a network drive for even more interesting possibilities. If you have a Windows 98 or XP machine, you could install daemon tools and mount CD images to your network drive, enabling easier installation of games and software without the need to burn a disk. I tend to prefer Samba the most, fast, but it has some caveats. Using a modern version of Windows for file sharing can be spotty and likely won't work well. So I recommend setting up a virtual machine with Windows 2000 or Windows XP installed and configuring your file sharing there. Another caveat with networking is that it involves using Ethernet, and if you're on Wi-Fi, you may encounter difficulties. There are ways to work around this issue by purchasing Ethernet cords and a network switch to route both your main PC and your vintage PC through the network switch. As far as the internet is concerned, if you wish to connect to the internet, I recommend finding a way to connect your network switch to a router or modem. However, if you can't find a way to reach your router, then I would suggest trying Powerline Ethernet if possible. Prior to network file sharing, there was the dual modem cable, a slower method of transferring files. You would use a program like HyperTerminal to send files that way. The only issues you will have are the lack of a COM port on your main PC and the needed patience to send a file, depending on the size. Though you can get away with buying a USB to RS-232 adapter. However, there is not much you can do to achieve faster transfer speeds. Perhaps you could try parallel file transferring, but I haven't tried that at all, and I don't know if there are any adapters for modern hardware. One more common way of transferring files, and something I used to do next to CDRs, is using USB flash drives. Having been around since 1997, USB originally required a driver for Windows 95 and 98 to make flash drives work. It wasn't until Windows Millennium Edition that they started to work out of the box. The only caveat is the need for a driver unless you're on a newer operating system and the transfer speeds are not too great by modern standards. That's all of the more common methods of transferring files, but there are a few honorable mentions. One of the more interesting methods of transferring files is using zip drives. It is similar to a floppy disk except it holds more storage, up to 750 megabytes. However, this type of storage fell out of favor in favor of USB and CDRWs. Honestly, despite having zip drives, I've never had any zip disk to try this out for myself. If you are also a bit crazy or have no choice, you could invest in an adapter that allows you to connect the IDE or SCSI hard drive to your main computer, enabling you to transfer files that way. That can be a bit of a hassle if it was a mechanical drive, but if you have an SD card, you could invest in an SD to SCSI or IDE adapter for a more convenient way of transferring files back and forth. So that's pretty much it to my knowledge on physical media and how you can transfer files between old hardware in your main computer. My main reason for using a Samba network drive is that I have a collection of games I want to easily access without going back and forth with trying to download. I just have these files right at my fingertips. But it doesn't mean I stopped using physical media completely. It is still useful for plenty of reasons. For instance, if your network drive is acting up, you can dust off some CDRs and install software that way. Additionally, when you need to reinstall Windows, it is not always easy with networking, but there is PXE for that. However, setting up PXE can be a bit complicated, and you would need a network card that can support it. Anyway, that about wraps up this video. What is your favorite method of file transferring? I would like to hear it in the comment section down below. And as always, peace out.